Stay back from my K9. The voice was a low growl, more animal than human, echoing with the authority a man used to giving commands and seeing them obeyed without question. It was a sound scraped raw by desert dust and battlefield fury, now trapped within the sterile, antiseptic walls of the Walter Reed National Military Medical Center. The ward, usually a place of hushed tones and the rhythmic beep of machines, fell into a sudden, sharp silence. Nurses paused mid-chart, physical therapists froze with their hands on recovering limbs, and even the low hum of the ventilation system seemed to hold its breath. The crowd of onlookers, a mix of medical staff and visiting family, didn't laugh, but a wave of nervous energy, of complicit understanding, rippled through them. They knew Chief Petty Officer Marcus Thorne. They knew the dark thunder that lived in his eyes since the IED had torn his leg and his world apart. And they knew the dog, Havoc, the magnificent Belgian Malinois who lay at the foot of his bed, a living, breathing extension of the SEAL's own broken soul. The dog's head was up, ears twitching, a low rumble vibrating in his chest, mirroring his handler's command. But the woman the command was directed at, the new contract nurse, offered no reaction. Her name was Anna Reed, and she was as remarkable as a glass of water. Brown hair pulled back in a simple, severe bun, a plain face, devoid of makeup, that you would forget the moment she turned away. She was of average height, average build, dressed in the same pale blue scrubs as everyone else. She hadn't flinched. She hadn't spoken. She hadn't even met Thorne's furious gaze. Instead, her own calm, gray eyes were fixed on the 4 drip beside his bed, her hand hovering over the bag, her entire focus on the simple, professional task of checking the saline solution. Her silence was not timid, it was absolute. It was a void that absorbed Thorne's rage and gave nothing back, and this infuriated him more than any argument could have. It was a silence that felt ancient, practiced, a discipline forged in pressures far greater than the anger of a wounded warrior. The other staff saw a mousy, intimidated woman. They saw someone in over her head. But when Captain Eva Rostova, the chief medical officer, making her morning rounds, paused in the hallway and saw the new nurse's stance, the way her feet were planted shoulder-width apart, the perfect balance in her posture, the relaxed readiness in her shoulders, she didn't see a victim. She saw a weapon at rest. She saw a familiar ghost from a world far from this polished hospital. If you believe that true strength is found not in the volume of the voice but in the steady calm of the hands, type competence below. Chief Thorne, however, saw only weakness. He saw the civilian world encroaching on his last bastion of control. This woman, with her soft hands and quiet demeanor, represented everything he had fought against, everything he held in contempt. She was a paper pusher, a form filler, someone who wouldn't last 10 seconds outside the wire. "Did you hear me?" he snarled, pushing himself up on his elbows. Pain shot through his mangled leg, a fiery reminder of his helplessness, which only stoked his anger. That's not a therapy poodle. He's a Tier 1 asset. He's seen more combat than your entire graduating class combined. You don't look at him, you don't talk to him, and you sure as hell don't get near him. Your job is to change that bag and walk away. Understand, his words were a performance, meant for the entire ward. It was a declaration of territory, a reassertion of a dominance he felt slipping away with every painful physical therapy session, with every doctor's pitying glance. Havoc, sensing the escalating tension in his handler's voice, lifted his lip just enough to reveal a sliver of white teeth. The message was clear. Anna Reed finished her inspection of the 4-bag. She made a small, precise adjustment to the drip rate, her fingers moving with an unhurried, methodical grace. Only then did she turn her head slightly, her gaze still not meeting Thorne's, but resting somewhere on the wall behind him. "Understood, Chief," she said. Her voice was as unremarkable as the rest of her, a low, even tone with no hint of fear or resentment. It was the voice of someone confirming a weather report, not acknowledging a threat. This placid acceptance was a profound insult to Thorne's rage. He wanted reaction. He wanted fear, anger, a protest, anything to validate the storm inside him. Her calm was a mirror, and he didn't like the reflection. He saw a broken man lashing out, and he hated her for showing it to him. The other nurses began to move again, the tension easing slightly, but the story was already being written in their minds. The new girl, Anna, had been put in her place by the resident hero. They felt a small, secret satisfaction. Thorn was difficult, but he was their difficult hero, and this quiet outsider had violated the unspoken rules of the ward. They exchanged glances that sealed their judgment of her as meek and ineffectual, another temporary contractor who would soon be overwhelmed and request a transfer. They failed to notice the way she moved, the absence of any wasted motion. They didn't see that her eyes, while seemingly passive, missed nothing. The slight tremor in Thorn's hand, the specific way Havoc's ears angled towards the hallway, the faint sheen of sweat on another patient's brow 2 beds down. She was an observer, a collector of data, and in this environment, she was processing threats and variables with a speed they couldn't possibly comprehend. Her silence wasn't emptiness. It was a state of profound and total awareness. The crisis, when it came, did not announce itself with a siren or a shout. It began with a quiet whimper. 2 beds down from Thorn, a young Marine corporal named Diaz, who had lost both his legs to a pressure plate in San Jin, had been fighting a silent war in his dreams. His sleep was a battlefield of phantom limbs and echoing explosions. The whimper escalated into a guttural moan, his head thrashing against the pillow. His eyes snapped open, but they weren't seeing the sterile white ceiling of the ward. They were seeing the sun-baked mud of an Afghan village. A sudden, violent spasm racked his body. He tore the 4 from his arm, blood arcing in a dark spray against the white sheets. "Contact!" he screamed, his voice a raw, terrified shriek that shattered the morning's fragile peace. "Contact front!" Chaos erupted. A junior nurse fumbled for the panic button, her hands shaking. An orderly moved forward, then hesitated, unsure how to approach a man reliving the worst moment of his life. Diaz, fueled by a surge of adrenaline and phantom terror, threw himself out of the bed, landing on the floor with a sickening thud. He began crawling, dragging his truncated body across the linoleum, his hands scrabbling for a weapon that wasn't there. The commotion sent a jolt through Havoc. The dog sprang to his feet, a deep, menacing bark tearing from his throat. To the dog, the equation was simple. His handler was injured and agitated, and there was a sudden, violent threat filling the room with the scent of fear and blood. He placed himself between Diaz and Thorn's bed, his body lowered into a pre-attack crouch, his focus locked on the crawling Marine. Thorn, trapped by his own ruined body, could only watch in horror. "Kavik, no. Stand down," he yelled, but his voice was lost in the cacophony of Diaz's screams and the dog's furious barking. He knew what was about to happen. He had seen Havoc work. He knew the devastating, bone-breaking efficiency of that dog, and he was powerless to stop it. The staff were frozen, caught between the violent patient and the aggressive canine. It was a standoff, seconds away from a tragedy. In that frozen moment of panic, Anna Reed moved. She didn't run. She didn't shout. Her movements were a study in fluid dynamics, a seamless flow of intention and action. While others saw chaos, she saw a sequence of events to be managed. Her first action was to the medical cart. Her hand didn't fumble. It went directly to a specific drawer, retrieving a syringe and a small vial of lorazepam. She filled the syringe with a practiced, single-motion efficiency, expelling the air bubble with a flick of her finger without even looking. Her second action was toward Diaz. She didn't approach him head-on, which would have been seen as a confrontation. She circled wide, staying out of his direct line of sight, her steps soft and silent on the floor. Her voice, when she spoke, was not the gentle, cooing tone one might expect. It was low, firm, and resonant. "Corporal Diaz," she said, her voice cutting through his panic screams with an undeniable authority. "You are at Walter Reed. You are safe." He didn't hear the words, but the tone registered, a signal of command in the fog of his terror. As she knelt beside him, he flailed, his arms swinging wildly. She didn't recoil. She flowed with emotion, catching his arm in a grip that was neither aggressive nor weak, but immovably firm, using his own momentum to guide the limb. With her other hand, She administered the sedative into his shoulder with a swift, clean motion. But the true miracle, the act that stopped every heart in the room, was directed at the dog. As she was tending to Diaz, Havoc, seeing her proximity to the perceived threat, broke his standoff and lunged. He covered the 10 feet between them in a blur of fur and teeth. A collective gasp sucked the air from the ward. Thorne screamed his dog's name in helpless despair. Anna didn't look up. She didn't even turn her head. As the dog was a foot from her, an unholy sound of snarling fury, she uttered a single, guttural word. It wasn't English. It wasn't a language anyone on that ward had ever heard before. It was a short, sharp burst of sound, like rocks grinding together. Vosh! The effect was instantaneous and absolute. It was as if she had flipped a switch deep inside the dog's brain. Havoc's lunge collapsed mid-stride. He skidded to a halt on the polished floor, his paws scrabbling for purchase. The snarl died in his throat, replaced by a confused whine. He shook his head, blinking, and then stared at the unassuming nurse. His entire posture changed. The aggression drained out of him, replaced by something that looked like profound, instinctual confusion. He sat, his tail giving a single, uncertain thump against the floor. The ward was plunged into a silence, so deep it was deafening. Every eye was on Anna Reed, who was now calmly checking Corporal Diaz's pulse as the sedative began to take hold. Thorne stared, his mouth agape, his mind refusing to process what he had just witnessed. That command. He knew that command. He hadn't heard it in years, not since Afghanistan. It wasn't a standard training command. It was a contingency, a deep-level override taught to a select few K-9 handlers in the field, a fail-safe word known only to the operator and the specialized support personnel who sometimes worked with them under the most extreme circumstances. It was a word that meant stand down and await new handler designation. It was a ghost word, and this quiet, plain nurse had just spoken it to his dog. Captain Eva Rostova had seen the entire incident unfold from the hallway. She hadn't intervened, not because she was frozen, but because she was observing. She had recognized the quiet competence in Anna Reed's posture from the very beginning, and she had wanted to see how this quiet professional would handle the ward's unique pressures. What she had just witnessed, however, went far beyond mere competence. It was a display of elite-level training and experience that had absolutely no place on the resume of a standard contract nurse. The medical crisis had been handled with a textbook perfection that was, in itself, remarkable. But the handling of the dog, that was something else entirely. That was a secret language from a hidden world. As the other nurses finally unfroze and rushed to help the now sedated Corporal Diaz, Rostova walked calmly onto the ward. She ignored the frantic chatter, her eyes fixed on Anna, who was now meticulously cleaning the small drop of blood from the floor where Diaz's fur had been torn out. She was restoring order, her focus already on the next small, necessary task. Rostova's gaze then shifted to Chief Thorne. The SEAL was pale, his bravado stripped away, leaving behind a raw, stunned confusion. He was looking at his dog, Havoc, who remained seated, staring at Anna with an intensity that bordered on reverence. The dog that had threatened to tear her apart moments before now looked like a supplicant before an oracle. Rostova walked past them all, her heels clicking with quiet authority on the linoleum, and stopped at the central nurse's station. She swiped her ID card through the terminal and brought up the staff roster. She typed in Anna Reed's name. The initial file was thin, almost comically so. A nursing degree from a state university. Licenses in 3 states. A short list of civilian hospital jobs. It was a perfect camouflage, a life story designed to be overlooked. But Rostova had higher-level clearance. She typed her password into a secondary field and accessed the deeper, cross-departmental military personnel records. A new file appeared on the screen, and this one was almost entirely black. Thick bars of redaction covered most of the text, but what was left was enough to make the captain's breath catch in her throat. She read the visible fragments aloud, her voice low but carrying with perfect clarity in the now hushed room. Reed, Anna. Rank. Redacted. Unit designation. JSOC Medical Augmentation Unit. She paused, letting the weight of that acronym settle over the staff who were close enough to hear. Joint Special Operations Command. The very tip of the spear. Specialty. operational support nurse, canine trauma, and field stabilization. Her eyes scanned further down the screen. Deployments, a long list of redacted locations followed. Afghanistan, redacted. Syria, redacted. Horn of Africa, the list went on. Commendations. Bronze Star with V for Valor. Army Commendation Medal with combat distinctions. Joint Service Commendation. She trailed off, looking at the screen in disbelief. At the very bottom of the file was a short, unredacted note, an addendum from a 3-star general. It read, MS. Reed's contributions during Operation Nightfall were instrumental in saving the lives of 3 operators and K-9 Asset Storm. She operates with a degree of calm and competence under fire that is, in my 30 years of service, unparalleled. She is a legend in a community that does not create them lightly. Rostova looked up from the screen, her gaze sweeping over the stunned faces of her staff, before finally landing on Thorn. The chief looked as though he'd been struck by lightning. The puzzle pieces were crashing together in his mind, the stance, the calm, the impossible command. He wasn't looking at a soft civilian nurse. He was looking at one of the quiet professionals, the shadow, people who moved between worlds, the ones whose stories were never told. Rostova walked over to where Anna was finishing her cleanup, placing a new sterile dressing on the floor. In a gesture that broke every conceivable protocol of rank and station, Captain Rostova, a decorated officer and the head of the entire medical wing, stood ramrod straight and brought her hand up in a slow, formal salute. "Ma'am," she said, her voice thick with a respect that bordered on awe. "I apologize. We were not aware of who you were. Your file. It doesn't begin to cover it." Anna simply finished her task, rose to her feet, and gave the captain a small, almost imperceptible nod. "I'm just here to do my job, Captain," she replied, her voice still infuriatingly, beautifully calm. The validation was complete. The quiet professional had been revealed not by a boast or a resume, but by an undeniable act of supreme competence. The story of what happened in Ward 7B spread through the base like a shockwave. It traveled from a nurse's station to the physical therapy gym, from a mess hall to the command briefing rooms. It became an instant piece of institutional folklore, a modern military myth. The details, as they always do, became grander with each retelling. In one version, Anna had stared down the dog, and it had whimpered and crawled to her on its belly. In another, she had reset Corporal Diaz's dislocated shoulder with one hand, while simultaneously calming havoc with a whisper. The guttural command, "Vass," was debated endlessly by the K-9 handlers at the kennels, none of whom had ever heard it. They concluded it had to be a relic from the early days of the program, a command known only to a handful of operators and their most trusted support staff, a piece of living history. Anna Reed, the quiet, unremarkable nurse, was suddenly the most talked about person at Walter Reed. She became a legend, a ghost who had walked into the light. The staff on her ward now watched her with a mixture of fear and profound respect. They gave her a wide berth, speaking to her in hushed, deferential tones. They saw her not as a colleague, but as something other, a warrior hiding in plain sight. They re-examined every quiet moment, every unassuming action, recasting it all in the light of this new revelation. Her silence was no longer meekness. It was the coiled stillness of a predator. Her efficiency was not just good organization. It was the practiced economy of motion learned in places where a wasted second meant death. For Chief Marcus Thorn, the revelation was a deeply personal cataclysm. His entire worldview, built on a foundation of hard-won arrogance and the clear dividing line between warrior and civilian, had been shattered. He had publicly humiliated and threatened a woman who had likely faced more danger, and done so with more grace than he could possibly imagine. The shame was a physical weight, heavier than the pain in his leg. For 2 days, he said nothing to her. He watched her as she made her rounds, her demeanor completely unchanged by her newfound fame. She was still quiet, still methodical, still professional. She treated him with the same detached courtesy as she did every other patient, her face betraying no hint of triumph or resentment. On the 3rd day, he could bear the silence no longer. As she was checking the sutures on his leg, her touch gentle and sure, he finally spoke, his voice low and hoarse. "The command," he said, not a question, but a statement hanging in the air. Havoc's first handler was Sergeant First Class Mike Ghost Corrigan, from the unit. He was the only other person I ever heard use that word. Anna paused in her work, her fingers still for a fraction of a second. She didn't look up at him. "Ghost was a good man," she said softly. "He taught it to me, in case he went down and Storm needed a new friend, Storm." The K-9 asset mentioned in her file. The connection was made. The shared history, the shared loss, was now a silent, unbreakable bond between them. Thorne finally understood. This woman wasn't just a nurse. She was a member of his tribe, a keeper of its most sacred trusts. The most profound transformation, however, was in Havoc. The dog's entire reality had been reoriented around Anna. He was a creature of instinct and training, and his every instinct now told him that this quiet woman was a figure of immense authority, a handler of the highest order. When she entered the ward, his tail would begin a low, steady thump against the floor. His eyes would follow her every move. The low-grade aggression he showed towards all other staff members vanished when she was present. He was calm, centered, and obedient in her presence, as if her quiet competence was a balm to his own restless warrior spirit. The symbolic moment, the one that would be photographed and pinned to the ward's bulletin board for years to come, happened a week after the incident. Anna was standing by Thorne's bed, discussing his physical therapy schedule with him. Thorne, now respectful and attentive, was listening intently. Havoc was lying at the foot of the bed, head on his paws, watching her. Without any command or prompting, the dog slowly sat up. He lifted his right front paw, bent it at the wrist, and held it up towards Anna in the classic, formal gesture of a K-9 salute. It was a trained response, a piece of ceremony taught to him by his first handler, Ghost, a trick he had not performed for anyone since Ghost's death. It was a sign of ultimate respect, a dog's solemn acknowledgement of a worthy commander. Thorne's breath hitched in his chest. He saw the ghost of his friend in that simple gesture. Anna stopped speaking and looked down at the dog. For the first time, a genuine, gentle smile touched her lips. She knelt down and briefly, gently, touched the top of Havoc's head. "Easy boy," she whispered. "Duty's done." It was an absolution for the dog and for the man. The legend of Nurse Reed was now cemented, not just by her file or by the stories, but by the undeniable, solemn respect of a warrior dog. Thorne, humbled and changed, had found a new path. He began to speak to the younger Marines on the ward, not with arrogance, but with the quiet wisdom of a survivor. He started helping them navigate their own pain and anger, channeling his own brokenness into a new mission. He learned from Anna that strength wasn't about the armor you wore on the outside, but the unshakable calm you cultivated on the inside. His healing, the real healing, had finally begun. Months bled into a year. Chief Thorne, now walking with a slight limp but with a straight back, completed his recovery and became a lead instructor for the K-9 program, training a new generation of handlers. He brought a new perspective to the training, a lesson in humility and respect that he had learned the hard way in Ward 7B. He often told the story of the quiet nurse and the SEAL's dog, not as a dramatic war story, but as a parable about the danger of assumptions. The photograph of Havoc saluting Anna remained on the bulletin board, a permanent fixture. New nurses and orderlies would ask about it, and the older staff would tell the tale, their voices filled with a reverence usually reserved for founding surgeons or decorated generals. The incident became known as the Reed Principle, an unofficial part of the hospital's culture, a reminder to look past the uniform, the rank, or the resume, and to recognize the quiet competence that is the true hallmark of a professional. Anna Reed was, of course, long gone. Her contract had ended, and she had moved on as quietly as she had arrived. There was no farewell party, no grand send-off. One day she was there, a silent, steady presence on the ward, and the next she was gone, leaving behind nothing but a transformed ward and a legend. Some said she went back overseas, back to the shadows where she belonged. Others believed she had simply moved to another hospital to bring her unique brand of quiet strength to a new set of broken soldiers. No one knew for sure. Her legacy was not in a plaque on the wall or a name on a building. It was in the changed behavior of a once arrogant SEAL. It was in the improved bedside manner of a dozen nurses who had learned to listen more and speak less. It was in the institutional memory of a place that had been reminded that heroes come in all forms, and that the most formidable are often the ones you never see coming. They are the quiet professionals, the steady hands in the storm, the silent figures who prove their worth not with words, but with undeniable, life-saving action. True legacy isn't found in the stories told about you, but in the standards that are upheld long after you are gone. It's in the quiet dedication of a nurse who now takes an extra moment to listen to a patient's fears because she remembers how Anna would observe. It's in the steady hand of a young therapist who maintains his calm during a PTSD episode because he heard how she moved through chaos as if it were still water. The Reed Principle became more than just a story. It became a verb. Younger staff would tell each other to read the room, meaning to stop, observe, and understand the entire situation before acting. Captain Rostova made it a part of her official orientation for all new medical personnel. She would stand before a room of bright-eyed, nervous recruits and point to the framed photograph of Havoc and Anna. "Your credentials got you in this door," she would tell them, her voice resonating with hard-earned wisdom. "They mean you are qualified. They do not mean you are competent. Competence is not on your resume. It's in your hands. It's in your eyes. It's in your ability to remain calm when everyone else is screaming." The woman in this photograph never once mentioned her service record. She never spoke of her medals. She simply did her job to a standard that most of us can only dream of achieving. Your goal here is not just to heal, but to learn to be that person. The quiet professional in the room. The one who proves their worth through action, not assertion. The story lived on. A powerful current of inspiration flowing through the veins of the institution. A constant and vital reminder that respect is not a right of rank, but something that must be earned, moment by moment, through the silent, disciplined application of one's craft. The triumph was not just Anna's over Thorne's prejudice, but the triumph of an idea that in any profession, from the battlefield to the hospital ward, true value is demonstrated, not declared. For more stories where quiet competence triumphs over ignorant prejudice and where silent discipline defines their worth, subscribe to Unknown Heroine Tales.